Have you ever wondered what happens when you die? It seems like such a simple question, yet throughout history, this mystery has driven people to build religions, wage wars, and dedicate entire lifetimes to finding an answer. But in a galaxy far, far away, one being claimed to have solved this riddle. His name was Darth Plagueis, and his quest to conquer death would change the fate of the galaxy forever. The tale begins not with Plagueis himself, but with a simple story. A tragedy, as Palpatine called it, told to a troubled young Jedi named Anakin Skywalker in the shadowy opera house on Coruscant. A seemingly innocent tale about a Sith Lord so powerful he could prevent those he cared about from dying. But like most things Palpatine ever said, this story was far from the whole truth. Darth Plagueis was real, and he was far more dangerous than most beings in the galaxy ever knew. In the shadows of galactic politics and far from the watchful eyes of the Jedi Order, Plagueis conducted experiments that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible with the Force. While the Jedi used the Force to protect and defend, Plagueis sought to bend its very fabric to his will. His specialty was midi-chlorian manipulation, the cellular components that connect living beings to the Force. Through decades of research and dark rituals, he developed techniques to influence these microscopic life forms, essentially attempting to control life itself. This mastery went beyond theory. Plagueis could actually prevent death in others. He could transfer life essence between beings, and perhaps most disturbingly, he attempted to create life from nothing but the Force itself. Some whispered that his experiments might have inadvertently caused ripples in the Force that led to the virgin birth of Anakin Skywalker, though Palpatine later failed to replicate this power despite numerous attempts. But Plagueis was more than just a mad scientist of the Force. In his public identity, he was known as Hego Damask II, a Moon financial expert and the Magister of Damask Holdings. The Moon species were naturally gifted with exceptional financial acumen, with their elongated heads housing brains specially adapted for complex calculations and strategy. Plagueis leveraged these natural talents along with his position to manipulate galactic finances and fund Sith operations across countless star systems. The banking clan, trade federation, and other massive corporate entities all danced to tunes Plagueis composed from the shadows. Every credit that changed hands, every trade route established, every economic crisis that mysteriously resolved itself ultimately served his grand design. Money and influence flowed like water through channels he had spent decades carving through the galaxy. And throughout all of this, he trained an apprentice, a human from Naboo named Palpatine. Their relationship lasted decades. Unlike many Sith master-apprentice pairings built on fear and instant obedience, Plagueis took a different approach with Palpatine. He mentored him deeply, sharing knowledge that Sith masters typically withheld from their apprentices as protection against inevitable betrayal. Plagueis taught Palpatine advanced Sith philosophy, combat techniques, and subtle tactics for infiltrating Republic politics. Together, they crafted what they called their grand design, a master plan to destroy the Jedi Order and rule the galaxy. Plagueis saw something special in Palpatine, a potential beyond what previous Sith had achieved. He spent years molding this potential, teaching Palpatine to hide in plain sight, to project warmth and trustworthiness while harboring cold ambition beneath. He showed him how to use the dark side while concealing its visible effects, maintaining the appearance of a normal human while channeling powers that would normally ravage a body with corruption. What made Plagueis truly feared even among the Sith who came before him, was his complete mastery of Force essence transfer. This technique allowed consciousness to survive beyond physical death, something both Jedi and Sith had sought for millennia. Plagueis perfected it to a degree no one had achieved before. This mastery marked him as truly unique in galactic history, a true anomaly who had solved the riddle that haunted all living beings. Palpatine recognized this greatness, initially referring to his master with the honorific Plagueis the Wise. This title acknowledged the unparalleled wisdom and power his master had accumulated. But as years passed and Palpatine grew more capable, this reverence gradually transformed into something else. The respect remained, but alongside it grew calculation, evaluation, and ultimately the cold assessment that all Sith apprentices eventually make of their masters. Despite his towering intellect and supernatural abilities, Plagueis had one critical blind spot. The rule of two, established by Darth Bane a millennium earlier, dictated that there should only ever be two Sith at once, a master and an apprentice. This tradition had kept the Sith alive in secret while the Jedi believed them extinct. Every Sith apprentice was destined to eventually challenge and overthrow their master to take their place. Plagueis knew this tradition well. He had followed it himself when he killed his own master. Yet somehow he convinced himself that his partnership with Palpatine transcended this ancient rule. Perhaps it was arrogance born from his many successes. Perhaps it was a genuine belief that they had moved beyond such limitations. Or perhaps it was simply that Plagueis, master of so many mysteries, failed to master his understanding of his own apprentice. Whatever the reason, this misplaced confidence would prove fatal, because while Plagueis saw their relationship as a partnership that had evolved beyond the rule of two, Palpatine never lost sight of the traditional Sith path to power. As their grand design neared completion and the Republic teetered on the edge of transformation, Plagueis believed he stood at the threshold of his greatest triumph. Supreme power was within reach. His centuries of research into immortality were bearing fruit. The Jedi remained oblivious to the Sith conspiracy unfolding before their eyes. What he failed to see was that Palpatine had been carefully measuring him all along, weighing his usefulness against his potential as a rival, calculating the precise moment when the scales would tip and the master would become an obstacle rather than an asset. That moment arrived sooner than Plagueis expected, because for all his wisdom, for all his power, for all his ability to see the future, there was one thing Darth Plagueis the Wise never saw coming, the one truth Palpatine would later hide from everyone else. The moment when his trusted apprentice would decide that two Sith Lords were one too many for the future he envisioned. And as Plagueis slept, confident in his position and security, Palpatine made his move. The apprentice was about to become the master. The legend of Plagueis the Wise was about to transform from current threat to useful myth, and the galaxy would never know how close they had come to witnessing something truly unprecedented. A Sith partnership that might have ruled for centuries through the power of immortality. But that future died with Plagueis himself as blue lightning coursed through his sleeping form. And with his death, Palpatine became the sole keeper of secrets that would reshape the galaxy. Secrets he would share only in carefully crafted half-truths when they served his purpose. Like the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, a story that contained just enough truth to tempt a young Jedi named Anakin Skywalker down a dark path from which there would be no return. They say you should never let your guard down. For a Sith Lord who had mastered the secrets of life and death, Darth Plagueis made a surprisingly mundane mistake. He fell asleep. The night that changed the course of galactic history began like many others. Plagueis and his apprentice Palpatine had been celebrating their political victories. The grand plan was proceeding perfectly. Soon, Palpatine would be elected Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, placing a Sith Lord at the very heart of galactic power for the first time in 1,000 years. Their drinks flowed freely that night, with Palpatine ensuring his master consumed more than his usual share. As Plagueis finally succumbed to the intoxication and drifted into sleep, he believed himself to be on the cusp of achieving everything the Sith had worked toward for generations. The Jedi remained blind to their existence. Political power was within their grasp, and his research into immortality was nearing completion. He and his apprentice would rule forever, transcending the limitations that had constrained all previous Sith. What Plagueis failed to realize was that Palpatine had been planning this moment for years. The apprentice stood over his sleeping master, observing the vulnerable state of the being who had taught him everything he knew about the dark side. Then, without hesitation, Palpatine unleashed a torrent of Force lightning. The blue energy cascaded over Plagueis, jolting him awake to the shocking realization of betrayal in his final moments. The murder wasn't quick. Palpatine took his time, savoring the death of his master, allowing Plagueis to fully comprehend that his grand vision of ruling alongside his apprentice had been nothing but a fantasy. When the lightning finally subsided, Palpatine wasn't finished. He gathered the body and performed an ancient Sith ritual, cremating Plagueis and sealing his own ascension as the new Sith Master. This act wasn't just about power. It was a full embracing of the dark side. By killing the being who had been like a father to him, Palpatine severed his last connection to anything resembling compassion or loyalty. This was the final step in his transformation, the moment when Palpatine fully became Darth Sidious, Lord of the Sith. With Plagueis gone, Sidious moved quickly to consolidate his position. His first priority was erasing any trace of his master's existence. The public persona of Hego Damas, the respected Mun financial expert, suddenly disappeared from galactic society. Official records were altered, memories were clouded through the Force, and within remarkably little time, few remembered the mysterious banking figure who had once wielded such influence. But Sidious didn't just erase Plagueis from public memory. He performed a much more calculated act of historical revisionism. Instead of allowing Plagueis to be forgotten entirely, he transformed him into something more useful, a myth that could serve his future plans. The real Darth Plagueis, with all his complexities and vulnerabilities, was replaced by the legend of Plagueis the Wise, a story Palpatine could deploy when needed. Perhaps the greatest theft occurred in the days following the murder. Palpatine systematically collected all of his former master's research, writings, and holocrons. These artifacts contain the accumulated knowledge of decades of research into midi-chlorian manipulation and immortality. Knowledge that might have benefited future Sith apprentices like Darth Vader was instead hoarded by Sidious alone. This selective approach to Sith knowledge reflected Palpatine's broader attitude toward Sith traditions. He would frequently invoke ancient Sith wisdom and cite principles like the Rule of Two when it suited his purposes. But the moment these traditions became inconvenient, Palpatine discarded them without a second thought. The clearest example of this utilitarian approach came in his training of apprentices. The rule of two, established by Darth Bane, clearly stated there should only be one master and one apprentice at any time. Yet Palpatine violated this fundamental tenet repeatedly throughout his career. He began training Darth Maul while still apprenticed to Plagueis. Later, he would simultaneously maintain Count Dooku as his official Sith apprentice while grooming Anakin Skywalker as his replacement. For Palpatine, Sith traditions were tools to be used rather than principles to be honored. The only consistent value he upheld was the pursuit of personal power. Everything else, from ancient Sith philosophy to sworn oaths, could be discarded the moment they no longer served his ambitions. Despite his betrayal and dismissal of much of what Plagueis stood for, Palpatine never fully escaped his master's influence. The research into immortality that Plagueis had pioneered continued to fascinate Sidious throughout his life. He dedicated significant resources to building upon his master's work, seeking the secret to eternal life that had eluded even Plagueis. This obsession revealed something important about Palpatine. For all his power, for all his strategic brilliance, he remained in some ways the apprentice, unable to surpass his master in this one crucial area. Despite years of effort, Palpatine never managed to replicate Plagueis's most significant achievements in midi-chlorian manipulation. When faced with his own mortality, he was forced to resort to cruder methods, transferring his consciousness between clone bodies rather than achieving true mastery over death. The political consequences of Plagueis's murder were immediate and far-reaching. Without his cautious master restraining him, Palpatine was free to accelerate his plans. The Naboo crisis, the revelation of the clone army, the manipulation of the Trade Federation all unfolded more rapidly than might have occurred under Plagueis's more measured approach. In the financial sector, the power vacuum left by the disappearance of Hego Damask created brief turmoil, but this too served Palpatine's purposes. As markets fluctuated and corporations scrambled to adjust, Sidious quietly absorbed his former master's vast corporate empire into his own network of influence. Banking clans, trade guilds, and manufacturing conglomerates that had once answered to Plagueis now served Palpatine, often without realizing the transition had occurred. By the time Palpatine secured his position as Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, all evidence of Plagueis's existence had been wiped away or transformed into something useful. The few beings who might have remembered Hego Damask dismissed him as a reclusive financier who had retired from public life. No connection was ever made between this forgotten moon and the Sith Lord who had nearly achieved immortality. In the years that followed, as Palpatine methodically transformed the Republic into the Empire, he would occasionally reflect on his former master. Not with remorse, for Sidious was incapable of such emotion, but with a certain grudging respect. Plagueis had been a worthy teacher, even if he had failed the final test that all Sith Masters eventually face. The truth of their relationship, the full extent of Plagueis's powers, and the details of his murder became one of the many secrets Palpatine guarded jealously. Even his most trusted servants were given only fragments of the story, carefully selected to serve whatever purpose Sidious had in mind at the moment. For the rest of the galaxy, Darth Plagueis existed only as a story, a tragedy told by a seemingly kindly chancellor to a troubled young Jedi. A story about a powerful Sith who could save others from death, but not himself. a story that contained just enough truth to be compelling, while omitting the details that might reveal too much about the teller. The ultimate betrayal was thus completed not just in the moment of murder, but in the systematic erasure and reinvention that followed. Palpatine had not just killed his master, he had taken control of his legacy, transforming the real Darth Plagueis into a tool that would continue to serve Sidious long after his death. And in doing so, he ensured that no one would ever know the full truth about the Sith Lord, who had come closer than any before him to conquering death itself. Some secrets are kept out of shame, others out of fear. But the most powerful secrets are those hidden because they contain truths too dangerous for others to know. The full story of Darth Plagueis fell squarely into this category for Palpatine. As the Clone Wars ravaged the galaxy, Senator Palpatine cultivated a special relationship with Anakin Skywalker. Their bond began when Anakin was just a child, fresh from Tatooine and mourning the loss of his first mentor, Qui-Gon Jinn. Over the years, these seemingly innocent conversations in the corridors of power evolved into something more calculated. Palpatine positioned himself as a father figure, a trusted advisor offering guidance when the strict Jedi Council seemed cold and distant. By the final days of the Republic, their relationship had reached the point where Anakin would confide his deepest fears to the Chancellor, and this is exactly what Palpatine had been waiting for. When Anakin began experiencing nightmares about his secret wife Padme dying in childbirth, Palpatine recognized the perfect opportunity to deploy his most carefully crafted weapon, the legend of Darth Plagueis the Wise. The setting Palpatine chose was deliberate, the galaxy's opera house on Coruscant, during a performance of the Mon Calamari Ballet. Away from the Jedi Temple, surrounded by the elite of Republic society, Anakin would feel both special to be included and removed from the watchful eyes of the Jedi. The story Palpatine told that night was a masterpiece of manipulation, tailor-made to exploit Anakin's greatest vulnerability, his fear of losing Padme. Palpatine presented the tale as a Sith legend, something the Jedi would never teach. He described Plagueis as a Dark Lord so powerful and so wise that he could use the Force to influence midichlorians to create life and prevent people from dying. The hook was set. For a young man tortured by prophetic dreams of his wife dying, the possibility of such power was irresistible. What Palpatine carefully omitted from his story were the failures and limitations of Plagueis' research. He never mentioned that these techniques were experimental and unstable. He withheld the fact that Plagueis had never fully mastered the ability to save others from death, despite decades of gruesome experiments. And most critically, he never revealed that he himself had killed Plagueis before these techniques could be perfected. This selective storytelling was pure manipulation. By emphasizing life creation and immortality while hiding the instability of these powers, Palpatine framed the dark side as the solution to Anakin's most desperate problems. He knew that once planted, this seed would grow in the fertile soil of Anakin's fear and desperation. The story also contained another layer of misdirection regarding Sith capabilities. When discussing Plagueis' powers, Palpatine described them as unnatural, something the Jedi would view as an abomination. The framing accomplished two goals. First, it reinforced Anakin's growing distrust of the Jedi Order by suggesting they were withholding crucial knowledge. Second, it normalized the idea that power, regardless of its source or nature, was something to be sought rather than questioned. What Anakin could not have known was that Palpatine himself had spent years trying to replicate Plagueis' achievements without success. The methods were indeed unnatural, requiring twisted applications of the Force that corrupted both user and subject. But none of these complications made it into the version of the story Anakin heard that night. The legend of Plagueis served another purpose beyond turning Anakin to the dark side. It was part of Palpatine's broader strategy of suppressing rival Sith ideologies. By keeping the full extent of Plagueis' research hidden, Palpatine prevented potential rivals from accessing knowledge that might challenge his authority. Consider Count Dooku, who served as Palpatine's apprentice during the early stages of the Clone Wars. Despite his status as Darth Tyrannus, Dooku was given only fragments of Sith knowledge, nothing that would allow him to grow too powerful or independent. Sidious never shared Plagueis' most valuable research with Dooku, ensuring the Count remained a tool rather than a true partner in the Sith legacy. The same pattern could be seen with Darth Maul. Though trained from childhood by Sidious, Maul was kept ignorant of the deeper mysteries of the Sith, including the existence and powers of Plagueis. Maul was raised as a weapon, a blunt instrument of Sith revenge against the Jedi, not as an equal worthy of inheriting the full breadth of Sith knowledge. Perhaps most significantly, even Darth Vader was kept in the dark about many aspects of Plagueis' research. Despite Vader's desperate interest in techniques that might have saved Padme, Palpatine never shared the full extent of what he knew. Instead, he told Vader that they would work together to discover the secret to cheating death, pretending that this knowledge had died with Plagueis, rather than admitting he had stolen and hidden it. This pattern of withholding knowledge served to keep all of Palpatine's apprentices dependent on him. None were given enough information to potentially surpass or challenge their master. The complete truth about Plagueis remained Palpatine's closely guarded secret, a source of power and security that he refused to share with anyone. The story grows even more complex when we consider what some legend sources suggest about Plagueis' experiments and their unintended consequences. There are indications that Plagueis' extensive manipulation of midichlorians may have inadvertently caused a reaction in the Force itself. Nature, seeking balance, responded to his dark side manipulations by creating their opposite, a being of pure Force potential, Anakin Skywalker. If true, this would mean that the very person Plagueis may have accidentally created ended up being the one Palpatine would corrupt and turn against the Jedi. The irony is almost poetic. The Chosen One, prophesied to bring balance to the Force by destroying the Sith, was instead used by Palpatine to destroy the Jedi. Palpatine took what should have been the Sith's destruction and transformed it into their greatest victory. This paradox was yet another truth too dangerous to share. If Anakin had known he might be the result of Sith meddling with the natural order of the Force, his path might have been very different. So Palpatine kept this possibility hidden, along with so many other aspects of the true story of Plagueis. On an operational security level, Palpatine's myth-making about Plagueis served yet another purpose. By transforming his former master into a shadowy legend rather than a historical figure, he created confusion among those who might have otherwise connected the dots. Jedi historians and researchers who might have tracked the re-emergence of the Sith were led astray by the mixture of truth, half-truth, and fiction surrounding Darth Plagueis. This confusion bought Palpatine valuable time. The Jedi Order, despite their resources and connection to the Force, failed to discover the Sith's return until it was far too late. By the time they realized Palpatine's true identity, the stage was already set for Order 66 and the fall of the Republic. The decision to share the legend of Plagueis with Anakin, while withholding the complete truth, reveals much about how Palpatine operated. He understood that information is power, and that partial truths can be more effective than complete lies. By giving Anakin just enough of the story to tempt him, while holding back the details that might have warned him, Palpatine engineered the fall of the Chosen One with surgical precision. The Plagueis legend became Palpatine's narrative weapon, deployed at exactly the right moment to exploit Anakin's fears and push him toward the dark side. It offered hope where the Jedi offered only acceptance of loss. It promised power where the Jedi counseled restraint. And most dangerously, it suggested that the rules which had constrained Anakin throughout his life as a Jedi might be broken without consequence. For Anakin Skywalker, caught between prophetic nightmares and a rigid Jedi code that forbade the attachments he held most dear, the story of a Sith Lord who could prevent death was impossible to resist. Like a moth drawn to flame, he moved closer to Palpatine, driven by the desperate hope that somewhere in the legacy of Darth Plagueis lay the power to save the woman he loved. History belongs to those who control the narrative. Throughout his ascent from senator to chancellor to emperor, Palpatine demonstrated a masterful understanding of this principle. His suppression of the truth about Darth Plagueis was not an isolated case, but part of a broader pattern of information control that defined his rule. Consider what happened to the planet Kamino. When Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi sought information about this world and its cloning facilities, he discovered something disturbing. The entire planetary system had been erased from the Jedi archives. The deletion was no accident, but a calculated move to conceal the clone army until Palpatine needed it. Just as he had erased and rewritten the truth about Plagueis, Palpatine systematically removed any information that might threaten his plans for galactic domination. In both cases, the strategy was the same. Control what people know, and you control how they think. Limit access to the truth, and you limit the possibility of resistance. This approach served Palpatine throughout his career, from his earliest days as a politician to his final years as emperor. The ability to shape galactic narratives proved more powerful than any fleet of star destroyers. The way Palpatine handled his apprentices reveals another disturbing parallel to how he treated the memory of Plagueis. Just as he transformed his former master from a real person into a useful myth, Palpatine viewed his own apprentices as disposable assets rather than true Sith partners. Count Dooku, despite his aristocratic background and formidable Force abilities, received only limited Sith training. Palpatine kept him on a need-to-know basis, ensuring Dooku remained dependent on his master for further knowledge. When Dooku no longer served his purpose, Palpatine ordered his execution without a moment of hesitation or regret. The pattern continued with Darth Vader. Despite being perhaps the most powerful Force user of his generation, Vader was kept ignorant of crucial Sith knowledge, particularly regarding the secrets of immortality that Plagueis had pursued. This deliberate limitation kept Vader reliant on his master and prevented him from growing powerful enough to pose a genuine threat. Most telling was Palpatine's plan to replace Vader with Luke Skywalker. The moment he sensed greater potential in the son, he was ready to discard the father. This approach mirrored how Plagueis had treated apprentices as replaceable tools rather than true heirs to Sith knowledge. The difference was that Palpatine, unlike his master, never lost sight of the danger an apprentice could pose. He maintained firm barriers around the most valuable Sith secrets, ensuring no apprentice could gain enough knowledge to successfully challenge him. The legend of Darth Plagueis served Palpatine as more than just bait for Anakin Skywalker. It became a multi-purpose weapon in his arsenal of manipulation. On one level, the story tempted Force sensitives with the promise of powers beyond what the Jedi taught. Who wouldn't be intrigued by the ability to prevent death or create life? But the tale also contained a warning. By framing it as a tragedy, emphasizing how Plagueis could save others from death but not himself, Sidious implied a clear message. Only he, Palpatine, had the wisdom to safely wield such dangerous knowledge. Anyone else who sought these powers would meet the same fate as Plagueis. The story simultaneously attracted and intimidated, drawing potential dark side users to Palpatine while discouraging them from challenging his authority. Throughout his reign, Palpatine perpetuated what purists might consider Sith heresy. Traditional Sith teaching, as practiced by Plagueis, emphasized pure Force techniques and ancient rituals. Plagueis believed that true power came from mastering the Force itself. Palpatine took a more pragmatic approach. He freely merged Sith teachings with technology when it served his purposes. The Death Star, a technological terror rather than a Force-based weapon, became the ultimate symbol of his power. His later use of cloning technology to cheat death represented another deviation from traditional Sith methods. This willingness to bend or break Sith traditions marked Palpatine as different from his predecessors. Where Plagueis had been something of a Sith traditionalist, despite his groundbreaking research, Palpatine was an innovator who valued practical results over doctrinal purity. He kept what worked from Sith tradition and discarded what didn't, maximizing his personal power rather than serving some greater Sith legacy. Perhaps the greatest irony in the relationship between Plagueis and Palpatine lies in the quest for immortality. Despite killing his master to seize power, despite stealing all of Plagueis' research and hoarding it jealously, Sidious never achieved the true immortality that had been his master's greatest ambition. The methods Palpatine eventually used during his return in The Rise of Skywalker were a pale imitation of what Plagueis had sought. Transferring consciousness to clone bodies was a technological solution, not the pure Force mastery Plagueis had been developing. These clone vessels degraded rapidly, leaving Palpatine in a decaying form, searching desperately for new hosts. This was not victory over death, but merely a temporary evasion, a prolonged deterioration rather than true immortality. This failure suggests that perhaps Palpatine's greatest mistake was killing Plagueis before the research was complete. In his hunger for immediate power, he sacrificed the possibility of the ultimate power his master had been close to achieving. Had he been patient enough to allow Plagueis to complete his work, both might have achieved the immortality they sought. Instead, Palpatine gained the galaxy but lost the chance at eternal life. The cultural impact of Palpatine's myth-making about Plagueis extended far beyond his personal schemes. By reducing Plagueis to a cautionary tale, a story told in shadows, Palpatine obscured the return of the Sith from galactic awareness. Most beings lived their entire lives without realizing that the Sith had returned, let alone understanding their true nature or history. This widespread ignorance served Palpatine well. It allowed the Sith to operate in plain sight, with most people, even the Jedi, failing to recognize the danger until it was too late. By the time the truth became clear, the Republic had already transformed into the Empire, and the Jedi Order had been all but exterminated. Even after the fall of the Empire, the legacy of deception continued. Survivors like Luke Skywalker faced the monumental task of reconstructing Jedi knowledge from fragments, hampered by the fact that so much history had been distorted or destroyed. Separating Sith truth from Palpatine's lies proved nearly impossible, as few reliable sources remained untainted by his influence. The story of Darth Plagueis, the truth that Palpatine hid so carefully, offers a window into how the most successful tyrant in galactic history operated. He understood that control over information was as important as control over territory or military forces. He recognized that legends could be more powerful than the truth, especially when carefully crafted to serve specific purposes. Most importantly, Palpatine grasped that the most dangerous truths are often the ones kept closest. The real story of Plagueis, with all its complexities and implications, remained locked away in Palpatine's mind, shared only in fragments when it served his immediate goals. In the end, the truth about Darth Plagueis remained hidden because that truth represented something Palpatine both coveted and feared: the possibility of power greater than his own. By controlling the narrative, by transforming his master from a person into a legend, Palpatine ensured that no one else would follow in Plagueis' footsteps. The secrets of true immortality, of perfect mastery over life and death, died with Plagueis, or remained locked in archives only Palpatine could access.